Before we dive into today's story, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. Now, let's get into it. I sat at the reclaimed wood table of Charlottesville's most exclusive farm-to-table restaurant, quietly pouring a $200 Cabernet. My future in-laws, Henri and Genevieve, were speaking rapid, mocking French, entirely convinced I understood nothing more than sawdust and nails. They laughed, treating me less like a future family member and more like a piece of rustic furniture. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was clinical. As I listened to their crisp Parisian accents bouncing off the exposed brick walls, I began cataloging their insults like items on a balance sheet. I had spent 15 years working structural carpentry overseas, building custom timber frames in places where the weather was as unforgiving as the foreman. That was where I learned French. I learned it by absorbing the harshest, most technical vocabulary imaginable. But I had kept that skill quiet because nobody in Virginia horse country cares about conjugating foreign verbs until it becomes a matter of leverage. Right now, I was letting them accumulate a massive debt of ignorance. Henri picked up his fork and gestured dismissively at me, saying to his wife that the American carpenter was quaint, but ultimately unrefined. Genevieve agreed, specifically mocking the custom mahogany dining table I had spent 4 months crafting by hand for my daughter Maya. She called it amateurish, a heavy, ugly thing fit only for peasants. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon regret, but there was only clarity. This wasn't a breakdown, it was an audit. I recognized exactly what they were doing. This was the trap of cruel normalization. When people view you not as a person, but as an asset to be managed, their cruelty becomes routine. They don't wake up deciding to be evil. They simply normalize the idea that your feelings, your labor, and your existence are secondary to their convenience. It's a psychological mechanism that allows them to extract your value without paying the cost of human empathy. I realized in that moment that I had been the silent investor in their version of family, footing the bill for their arrogance. They didn't see a mother or a master artisan sitting across from them. They saw utility. But they were deeply miscalculating my tolerance for bad investments. I smiled, nodded, and offered them the breadbasket, playing the part of the obliging, simple woodworker they wanted me to be. Every word they spoke was being recorded in the ledger of my memory. They were writing the contract of their own demise, and I was going to ensure they paid the principal and the interest in full. I sat there, calculating the exact metrics of their arrogance. They assumed my calloused hands meant a slow mind. They assumed my silence was submission. But in my line of work, silence is just the time spent measuring the cut. I watched Henri sip his wine, oblivious to the fact that his casual cruelty was the very mechanism that would dismantle his future. When the check arrived, a staggering total that Henri made a grand, empty show of reaching for, I simply placed $900 in cash on the leather folder and pushed it toward the waiter. I smiled at my future in-laws and graciously invited them to spend the entire week leading up to the wedding in my property's guest house. Genevieve offered a patronizing smile, speaking slowly in English to tell me how generous I was being. I responded with equal simplicity, assuring her it was my pleasure. I was giving them exactly what they expected. Some people might wonder why I didn't flip the table right then and there. This is the invisible chain of the survivor. To those who haven't experienced it, restraint looks like weakness or submission. But the truth is entirely different. When you have spent your life building structures designed to withstand hurricanes and sheer force, you learn that immediate, explosive reactions only damage the foundation. True survival isn't about uncontrolled anger. It's about holding your ground while you calculate the precise stress points of your opponent. You let them believe they hold the chain, never realizing you are the one deciding when to snap it. I wasn't submitting. I was gathering intelligence. As soon as I returned to my main house that evening, I opened my laptop and started clicking. I didn't ask why they hated me. I didn't waste time analyzing their lack of affection. Love is a contract, and I had just realized they were trying to defraud the principal. I picked up my phone and called Grant, a corporate risk consultant I had met during a massive commercial build in Dubai 10 years ago. Grant specialized in forensic accounting and uncovering international liabilities. I gave him the full names of Henri, Genevieve, and Tristan. I told him I needed a complete, unredacted history of their financial footprint in France. I needed to know what they were running from and what they were trying to gain. Grant didn't ask questions. He simply quoted his retainer, and I wired him $5,000 immediately. It was a business expense necessary to protect my life's work. Over the next few days, I continued playing my role flawlessly. I brought them fresh coffee in the mornings. I listened to Tristan talk about his grand plans for the future, noting how he carefully avoided discussing how he intended to fund them. I watched Maya look at him with complete trust, unaware that she was signing up for a subscription where she would be the only one paying. Every smile I gave them was a calculated investment in their false sense of security. I treated them with the utmost courtesy, behaving exactly like the simple, accommodating woodworker they believed me to be. They walked around my acreage, admiring the views, entirely convinced that they were the apex predators in this scenario. They had no idea that I was simply waiting for the financial forensics to clear, methodically building the trap they were so eagerly walking into. The call from Grant came on Wednesday afternoon while I was in my workshop sanding a piece of reclaimed oak. The smell of sawdust and mineral spirits was grounding, a sharp contrast to the toxic reality I was about to uncover. I wiped my hands, hit accept, and put the phone on speaker. Grant didn't waste time with pleasantries. He delivered the data with the precision of a surgeon. Henri's prestigious import business was nothing more than a collapsing shell corporation, choked by hundreds of thousands of euros in unpaid estate taxes in Normandy. They weren't wealthy aristocrats, they were desperate debtors running from the French tax authorities. But the rot went deeper than Henri and Genevieve. Tristan, the man my daughter was supposed to marry in 3 days, was currently facing an active civil lawsuit in Lyon for a failed investment scam. He had defrauded 2 former business partners out of nearly 150,000 euros. He was looking for an exit strategy, and he had found Maya. Then Grant sent over the final document, the estate planning trust that Tristan had been aggressively pressuring Maya to sign before the wedding. He had pitched it to her as a standard wealth management vehicle, convincing her that they just needed my signature on it as a formality to merge our family's assets. I opened the PDF, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. It wasn't an estate plan, it was an offshore cross-collateralization agreement. The clauses were meticulously designed so that, upon their marriage and my tricked signature, the commercial acreage I owned, the 75 acres of prime Virginia real estate that housed my business, my home, and my daughter's future would legally become the primary guarantor for their foreign debts. They weren't just insulting my craftsmanship, they were systematically plotting to steal my land to pay off their fraudulent liabilities. I felt my jaw tighten, but my heart rate remained perfectly steady. This wasn't a family misunderstanding. This was a premeditated con. I thanked Grant, ended the call, and forwarded the entire dossier to Roger, my business attorney of 15 years. Roger and I had navigated zoning boards, commercial disputes, and contract breaches together. I told him to review the documents and draft the necessary paperwork to sever all ties. No hesitation. No emotional hand-wringing. Just cold, decisive action. The anger I felt was entirely localized and completely under control. They thought they were dealing with an uneducated laborer. They didn't realize that a master carpenter knows exactly how to identify rot, and more importantly, exactly how to cut it out. I spent the rest of the afternoon meticulously reviewing every clause in that fraudulent trust, treating it like a flawed blueprint. I mapped out their entire strategy, tracing the lines of their deceit back to the source. They had planned to leverage my life's work to cover their criminal ineptitude. It was a bold business strategy, but they had fundamentally misjudged the property owner. I didn't shed a single tear for the wedding that was about to be canceled. I simply opened a new ledger and prepared to collect. Friday evening arrived, painting the sky over the Virginia hills in shades of deep violet and gold. The rehearsal dinner was set up in the main pasture behind my workshop, exactly as Maya had envisioned. Hundreds of string lights were suspended between the ancient oak trees, illuminating the long wooden tables dressed with burlap runners and wildflower centerpieces. It looked like a rustic dream, a perfect setting for a celebration of love. But to me, it looked like a crime scene waiting to be processed. Maya floated around the space in a simple white lace sundress, her face glowing with genuine happiness. She laughed with her friends, completely unaware of the auditioning sharks circling her. I watched Tristan approach her, wrap an arm around her waist, and kiss her cheek. It was a flawless performance, a calculated display of affection, designed to keep his primary asset compliant. I didn't feel panic. I felt a profound, chilling clarity. Henri and Genevieve stood near the outdoor bar, sipping the vintage champagne I had purchased. They held their glasses with practiced elegance, chatting casually with Maya's bridesmaids. They looked entirely convinced that they had successfully navigated their way to financial salvation. In their minds, the trap was set, the victim was compliant, and the payout was only 24 hours away. They believed they had won. I moved through the crowd, ensuring every detail of the evening was executing smoothly. The catering staff was serving the appetizers, the acoustic guitarist was playing softly in the background. Everything was perfectly staged. I glanced toward the edge of the property, where the gravel driveway met the pasture. Roger, my attorney, stood quietly in the shadows. He was dressed in a simple gray suit, holding a thick, brown, leather folder containing the complete documentation Grant had compiled, along with the legal notices we had drafted. He caught my eye and gave a single, brief nod. The machinery was in place. This wasn't revenge, it was accounting. I had let them enjoy my hospitality, drink my wine, and sleep under my roof while they plotted to steal my livelihood. I had given them every opportunity to show a shred of genuine humanity, and they had consistently chosen deception. As the caterers began pouring the wine for the main course, I signaled to the guitarist to stop playing. I picked up a silver spoon and tapped it gently against the side of my crystal water glass. The sharp, clear ringing cut through the chatter. The guests slowly quieted down, turning their attention toward the head table. I stood up, smoothing the front of my dress, my posture straight and commanding. I looked at Tristan, offering him a perfectly polite smile, then looked at Henri and Genevieve, who were raising their glasses in anticipation of a standard, tearful, mother of the bride speech. They expected sentimentality. They expected vulnerability. They were about to receive an itemized statement of their fraud. It was time to close the ledger. I stood at the head of the table, looking out over the faces of my daughter's friends, our family, and the people who intended to destroy us. I began in English, my voice projecting clearly across the quiet pasture. I want to welcome you all here tonight. It is a profound thing to see two families coming together, to witness the joining of lives and futures. I paused, letting the warmth of the sentiment settle over the crowd. Then, I turned my gaze directly to Henri, Genevieve, and Tristan. I didn't blink. I seamlessly switched my language. In flawless, razor-sharp French, the accent honed by years of working with tough rural foremen overseas, I continued. But true union requires honesty, something your family clearly knows nothing about. The shock on Henri's face was instantaneous. Genevieve's glass halted halfway to her mouth, her eyes widening in sheer panic. I let that sink in for a second, then switched back to English so my daughter and every guest could hear the truth. I recounted exactly what they had said at the restaurant, translating their mockery of my carpentry, their contempt for my home, and their assessment of my daughter as nothing more than a naive, exploitable American target. The guests gasped, sensing the sudden drop in temperature. I didn't stop. I laid out their premeditated theft. I detailed the offshore cross-collateralization agreement Tristan had tried to manipulate Maya into getting me to sign. Tristan jumped from his chair, his face flushed red. "Maya, don't listen to her. She's crazy," he yelled in English. I turned to him, my authority absolute. "Sit down and be quiet," I commanded, my voice cutting through the air like a steel blade. "You have no power here." I gestured to Roger, who stepped forward into the light and placed the heavy leather folder on the table. I opened it, pulling out the documented proof. Looking down at the documents, I read the figures so everyone could understand the magnitude of the fraud. Henri and Genevieve, you owe hundreds of thousands of euros in unpaid estate taxes in Normandy. Tristan, you are currently facing an active civil lawsuit in Lyon for defrauding your former business partners out of 150,000 euros. I slid the documents down the table toward them. You aren't a family of aristocrats. You are a syndicate of bankrupt con artists, and you plan to use my 75 acres of commercial real estate to underwrite your failures. They weren't shocked by what they had done. They were shocked that I had stopped playing along. Maya stared at the papers, her face pale, the illusion shattering in real time. Genevieve tried to speak, her voice trembling, but I held up a hand. "The balance sheet is closed," I stated coldly, looking directly into Tristan's panicked eyes. "And your account is entirely bankrupt. There will be no wedding. There will be no trust agreement. There is only the exit." The silence that followed was absolute. Tristan reached out to Maya, stammering an excuse, pleading with her to believe him. Maya looked at the documents, then at the man she had almost married. She didn't cry. She possessed the same structural integrity as the wood I worked with. She simply stepped back, creating a physical and emotional distance between them, and walked over to stand shoulder to shoulder with me. I reached into the leather folder one last time and pulled out a crisp, white sheet of paper. I handed it to Tristan. This is an itemized invoice for your family's week-long stay in my guest house, including the vintage champagne you so thoroughly enjoyed, I said, my tone completely transactional. I just looked him dead in the eye. You have until 6 o'clock tomorrow morning to pack your things and get off my property. If I see your faces at 6 to 1, I am calling the sheriff to have you all removed in handcuffs for trespassing. Henri tried to muster some remaining shred of dignity, demanding respect, but the leverage was entirely gone. They gathered their things and walked away from the lights, retreating into the darkness of the driveway. I watched them leave, feeling no regret, only the clean satisfaction of a completed audit. This is the justice of the planter. True justice isn't merely about punishing those who trespass against you. It is about protecting the soil. When you identify a weed that threatens to choke the life out of your crop, you don't negotiate with it. You uproot it entirely so that what remains can thrive. By evicting them, I wasn't just executing revenge. I was securing the foundation of my daughter's future, ensuring that the legacy I had built with my own hands would continue to grow, untainted by their corruption. I've come to realize that the hardest part of surviving deception isn't the anger. It's the courage required to cut ties with toxic environments. We are often taught to compromise, to keep the peace, at the expense of our own security. But true protection comes from standing firmly in reality, rather than clinging to comforting illusions. Forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes, it's the only way to set yourself free. You cannot build a solid house on rotten timber, and you cannot build a life with people who view your existence as a commodity. Standing there with my daughter, surrounded by the truth, I knew our foundation was stronger than ever. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever had to stand your ground and cut ties with a toxic situation, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below, share your experience, and make sure to subscribe for more stories about finding the strength to protect what matters most.